company, even if they're in the same industry and location. And we are planning to make that something that you can add. In a lot of cases, I think procurement data is really what makes risk actually useful to companies, because it's not really like, yes, we all know that manufacturing in India is risky, but it's possible that it could be even more risky if you're depending on that company for a specific needed item, something like that. And it could be less risky if it's a tier 3 supplier that you could go elsewhere very easily. So I think that's important to include in the process. And I was sort of wondering if you guys use any of that type of customization or any of those factors when you're looking at risk at all, or if it's just the risk engagement is there for every potential supplier regardless.
No, we absolutely do. Whether we want that to be on an external portal, the transfer of the values we expect with a particular third party is absolutely CSI stuff that we wouldn't want published anywhere. So I think that would be a lot of trust from GSK if we wanted to add that information to you. If
that's
we
a really good point.
Your information and have it for us, that's fine. But even internally, when we publish our information, we put it in data ranges, and the highest range is 500,000 and above, and nobody knows what the value is above that.
So if you're thinking about adding spend categories to EcoVadis in order to improve your risk profiling information, it would need to be made a bit more broad like that?
Well, yes. I mean, we look at your unit codes that aren't necessarily the same as what we have internally, but there's an alignment, so we can look at those. But things like how much is the potential or actual contract worth, that's not something we would think of putting into your systems.
Yeah,
it's not something we necessarily aggregate centrally here because of the problem with legal structures. So if you take any one consulting house, we may use them in 50 places across the globe, across 30 different legal entities, some of which are not in Roman script, and some are called, for example, PricewaterhouseCoopers versus PwC Limited.
Yeah.
So you don't actually know if they're the same.
One thing we've been considering is doing things like procurement risk on the category level, at least to start, to say maybe just this is X percentage of our spend. Do you think that would be more useful to you? Do you have data on that level?
So we do have people who are responsible for particular categories of spend, and I'm sure they will be very interested. They would know how much they spend in their category and how important that category was to GSK, although the level of spend, when you get into that level of knowledge, the spend level is almost incidental. They'd know that anyway. It's much more around what you're really doing, how important is that to our supply chain or to our R&D or whatever it is, to the flow of process that is ending up in business value. How important is the category to that, and which parts of that category are the most important and present the most risk? They layer that on in terms of their own oversight when they looked at your data. I don't think they'd expect to plug any of their data in. They might look at your geographical split, but they'd see it in their own business context. I'm not sure they'd expect to add anything to your data source. I think they'd expect to just take your data source and filter it through their own experience and requirements.
So that means that it would be something that we'd want to have be exportable for them or able to be filtered by specific categories and regions and things like that?
Yes. Like some of the version 10 reporting that we've got is really good. We can't necessarily export the underlying data, which makes it a bit problematic when people start asking questions and asking to justify. Well, of the 15% of your third parties that improved, how many improved from the score from under 25 to over 25, and which ones were they? I can't get reporting for. So I think a bit more, if it's going to be a really cool reporting tool, it has to have that kind of click sense sort of mentality of I can actually drill down into it, rather than simply here's the really nice geographical pictures, which often make complete sense and give you a really good flavour, but they don't necessarily truly inform.
Yeah, there's two parts because we need the executive summary so you can have a snapshot of what's going on, but you also need to be able to act on specific suppliers.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Again, I think there'll be a lot of work that will need to be done in terms of building corporate structures and groups and families. Take the example of PwC, how do you scale it up into one profile? And how do you know they're all part of the same group? So it's something to consider.
That makes sense, giving more information about how companies might be related. Are you thinking just in terms of corporate structure or anything about supply chain tiers?
Yeah, I think tiers and understanding, especially in manufacturing, the real supply chain. When you think about labour rights and the risks in that, there is an onus on big companies to truly understand their supply chain, which at an operational level is practically impossible.
Mm-hmm.
When you have complicated goods that may have 200 or 300 ingredients across, it becomes untenable very, very quickly. So anything where there can be a better level of root or a better level of understanding and a good sense of herd mentality protection. So one of the things we like from EK Vardis is that many people or many companies of a similar ilk use EK Vardis. So when we say we use EK Vardis, there is a kind of herd protection that says, well, you can't be all bad using EK Vardis. They're all right. They're used by lots of other people. Now, unfortunately, they're still used by Bayer, who lost 10% of their shares this morning. But there's a kind of herd protection piece. And so creating a critical mass and then making sure that that critical mass has a good enough reputational impact that the herd mentality is a strong one, or the herd protection is a strong one, is really important. And that's where things like the verticals, the RHI, etc., those initiatives also become more powerful. This is the life sciences view of the supply chain. And here's how we benchmark against that. That's then the sort of message that people like Vlad and I can give to our CBT and board members to say, this is why we do or don't need to take action. This is where the opportunity and the risk is. Because nothing happens in companies like ours for those kinds of conversations unless we have data to prove that we should be getting the checkbook out.
Actually, we hadn't thought about how vertical initiatives would come into play in this tool. That's a really interesting point to maybe have some data about the industry's supply chain as a whole versus yours from a risk perspective.
But one of the things that, I look at EK Vardis data and say, right, here's the baseline and here's us. What do we do about that? That drives conversation with the people who sit around Emma's table at GSK. Much more than a lot of other things, because like I said, this is baselined against companies like ours, and that really makes them take notice. So anything we can do that, if it's industry-wide, and then you can have your own internal comparators, that's worth us plugging our data into because we get something back, which is really beneficial. There's no point us plugging our data in to be told what our data says.
Yes, that is a very good point. I think we already covered a lot of these topics, but
Hey, Elise, can I just stop you for a second?
yes.
So I have one more question in this topic on how do you handle the current monitoring of your suppliers, because you mentioned the background check. So I understand that you are doing this sort of assessment before starting cooperating with a company. And how do you handle then the live monitoring of what's happening within the companies, what's happening in the industries, countries, etc.? Are you using some other third-party tools to do this, to obtain the data, or?
So if you talk about background checks, so our vendor, our provider of the background checks, since early this year, they've acquired the technology and they moved our background checks onto that platform, which now is providing us with continuous monitoring. So once they've issued us with the background check, they will continuously monitor for any new events. in relation to that third party, and they will fire off